Everyone wants to know, how do you tell what fish are showing up on your sounder? The truth is, it's not as simple as looking at an arch or a dot and guessing. To really identify fish on your screen, you've got to start with something that most anglers forget, and it has nothing to do with the sounder itself. In this video, I'll break down how I identify fish using both my sounder and, most importantly, my knowledge of the species and their behavior. Let's dive in. Before we even look at the sounder, there are two really important things to consider. The first is having an understanding of the fish species that actually frequent the area you're fishing. So for example, if I'm fishing in a river here in southeast Queensland, I know I'm likely to encounter Mulloway, bream, threadfin salmon, mangrove jack and flathead. If I were down in a river in Victoria, I'd expect to find bream, Mulloway and estuary perch. Or if I was in Sydney Harbour, I might run into bream again, tailor, or kingfish. Now, of course, there are always going to be exceptions or strange things that happen, and every now and then you'll see something that doesn't belong, a fish that you don't normally see in that area. So there are exceptions to this rule. But what we want to focus on are the likely scenarios. So what fish are we really actually likely to encounter when we go out in the water in this area? The idea here is that I want to understand, before I'm even fishing, what kind of options are going to pop up on my screen. Is there a chance I'm going to see schools of bream? Is there a chance I'm going to see schools of kingfish? Am I going to see a lone barramundi swimming past? So you need to kind of understand all the different scenarios ahead of time, so that when your sounder shows you something, you're not just completely blind and guessing. You already have half an idea of what you're expecting to see. The second thing is behavior. Now, every fish species has its own habits. The way it travels down the river, the way they feed, the way they position themselves around structure. For example, if I mark a school of fish in the middle of a river, I can be fairly confident that they're not mangrove jack, because that's just not how they behave. It could happen, I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but chances are very, very slim. I also wouldn't expect to see a flathead free swimming high up in the water column either. On the other hand, if I see a school of, let's say, smaller fish that are showing up as smaller dots on my sounder, it's winter time, I'm close to the mouth of a river system, I know that bream spawn this time of year on the east coast of Australia. There's a good chance that those fish I'm seeing are bream, because that's the pattern they follow. Therefore, before even catching one, I can be fairly confident that what my sounder is telling me, that those fish are bream. Similarly, if I notice bigger returns sitting close to the bottom, holding near structure and grouped up in a school, I'm pretty confident that they're going to be Mulloway, if I'm in a system that has them, of course. Each fish has a pattern, how they move through a system, how they feed, how they stage. Once you understand these patterns, the sounders start to make a lot more sense. And as much as we'd love it, the sounder tech isn't good enough yet to simply just tell us, hey, that's a Mulloway, or that's a mangrove jack, that's a flathead sitting high up in the water column. The more you bring into it, the more of your own knowledge you bring into it, the more accurate your fish ID will become. So it's really important that we have an understanding of, to some extent, of the type of fish that we're chasing or that live in the area, and the type of patterns that they follow. So this could mean the time of year they spawn. Do these fish like to school? Do these fish swim on the side on their own? Do they sit close to structure, or are they out in the open? Common one that I experience regularly when I'm fishing is the difference between a Mulloway and a threadfin salmon. Now, both will often be in the same areas, but they do some subtle differences. But they do have some subtle differences in the way that they go through an area that helps me tell which one is which. Now, firstly, threadfin salmon, I know they like to be in certain areas. They can be in shallow water, they can go deep as well, but they like muddy bottom, they like creek mouths, they like open flats. And the way they move through these areas is very, there's a certain way that they do that. Whereas Mulloway, they school up in big numbers, they don't normally go in shallow water, and they have some different things that they follow as well, different patterns. So I know that when I see a school, even if the return on the sounder looks very similar, if that grain of rice on my side scan looks the same as a Mulloway or a threadfin salmon, knowing the other aspects of it helps me identify what that fish could be. And end of the day, I'm still going to cast at those fish regardless, right? Fishing isn't that great that I can pick and choose which fish I want to catch. If I see a fish there, I'm probably going to cast at it anyway. But what it does help me do is identify, if I know what fish it is, then I've got a better chance of picking the right lure or the right retrieve or the right bait that's going to better help me catch that fish. So really important thing there, understand the location you're in and understand the patterns of the fish you're chasing. Now you can learn this, you can look it up online, it comes with experience as well, but the more you immerse yourself in understanding the patterns of those fish, the better you get at identifying them on the sounder. So now let's have a look at some screenshots and go through a few different scenarios, a few different fish types, and run you through my thought process when I'm looking at the screen. The first one we're going to look at is, well, I won't say it just yet, but this is an important one because it did trick me up quite a bit in my early days, and I wasted a lot of time chasing these. Now, on the screenshot here, we've got GPS on the left, we've got sonar on the middle on the top, and we've got down scan on the top right. And on the bottom, we have our side scan. Now, if you'll have a look on the bottom in our side scan, particularly here, we have these 4 or 5 shadows. And you can see that from the shape of them, they're quite triangular, especially this one, even in a cross sort of shape. Now, if you don't know much about side scan, the shadows that we see on the sound actually help us identify what the fish are. And the shadows in most screenshots will give you the most information, will help you the most to actually identify a fish. Now, these aren't specifically fish, these were actually eagle rays. And eagle rays are painful because they will hang around the same areas as Mulloway sometimes, around wrecks, and you can, if they're in big schools, which that happens quite often, you can get quite excited, put a cast in, and they'll actually eat a lure. And they'll run and make you think you've got something big on. So very disappointing to find out that you've hooked an eagle ray. But if you understand how they show up on your sounder, you can avoid that issue before and avoid making that cast. Now here's another screenshot where I've got, again, similar screen setup, GPS, sonar, down scan, and side scan on the bottom. Now there's a bit more happening in this shot. You can see on the left hand side, I've got a school of fish there, and there's quite a lot of them. If you can see, it's a bit hard to pick up because the contrast wasn't quite set well here, but each little individual line is a fish, and then each shadow behind it is the shadow of those fish. Now, because the actual shadows are quite close to the fish returns, those fish are sitting quite low to the bottom. Now, if you look on the right hand side, and even on the down scan a little bit, you'll see that we've got more fish shapes, but these shapes are different. They're more rounded. I don't know if you can tell, but they're quite triangular as well, similar to that last shot. On the left of that screenshot, I've got a school of Jew that are between 90 centimeters and a meter long. You know, excellent fish you'd want to catch. On the right hand side, I've got a school of eagle rays, the worst. You do not want to put your lure there. So I can tell that because of the shape of the shadows. Eagle rays will sit high in the water column, therefore the shadow is going to be further away from the actual return of the fish. So if I show you here, you can see this line where my cursor is, and the shadows are behind that. That indicates that the fish is sitting higher in the water column, the shadow is back down here. So by understanding the shape, and now it's not crystal clear shadow, it's not perfectly giving me a clear image of what it actually is, but I can pretty easily tell that those aren't long elongated shadows, those are rounded, quite, you know, dense shadows, not the fish I want to catch. So in this instance, I'm casting on the left. I'm not putting my lure anywhere near those fish on the right. Another great example of the shadow and the return is here's another one. Again, similar screen layout, side scan on the bottom, and let's look at the side scan again. Now over here is my return, so that's the actual object that my sounder has hit. Beams have hit this object, and behind it is giving us a shadow. And now from the image itself, it's not quite clear what is happening from that return, but the shadow quite obviously telling us that's a turtle. You can see the body, the arms, and one of the legs. So the shadow is telling us more of what it actually is. So we're using the shadow here to identify what the fish or object or turtle actually is. Now another one, again, not something we want to be catching, but here on the right hand side of the screen, we've got this big solid object. You can just see it there. It's a brighter return, and behind it is the shadow. Now it looks like a fish shape, but this is actually a dugong that was swimming past in Moreton Bay. I know that because it came up not long after and I saw it. But again, the shadow is helping us tell what that actually is, and the fact that that return is actually massive. That's clearly not a fish that I would expect, or I would never expect a fish of that size to be in that area in 20 foot of water, in crystal clear water in Moreton Bay. And one more, again, the shadow is telling us exactly what's going on. Here I am offshore from off the Gold Coast. I'm in 90 feet of water, which is about 30 meters, and on the left side, mostly under the boat, I've got a whale passing through. So again, you can see the return of the whale here. It's pretty obvious there's not going to be anything near that size under my boat that isn't a whale. And then you can see the shadow there as well, and the shadow is telling us a bit more information of what is actually what that actually is. And again, sharks. Lots of sharks here. Now there's heaps on the screen. You can see this is just a side scan shot, and each one of these little white returns is a shark. Now if I just looked at the returns, it can be hard to tell what it actually is, but by looking at the shadows, I can quickly tell that these are sharks just by the shape. You can imagine you're looking down at a shark from above. You can see the head and the whole profile of the body. So again, not a good thing, but also it helps us knowing if there's sharks in the area. It might mean we need to move on, go somewhere else, or we're likely to lose the fish that we do hook. Let's talk about bait fish. Now, how bait fish show up on a sounder can vary, and the description of bait fish can be very subjective. Bait fish could be referred to as prawns, which could be a very light haze on your sounder, up to slimy mackerel or even bonito, which would be substantially sized fish. So all bait fish will show differently. So it depends on the type of bait fish in the area to what they'll look like. Generally, what you're looking for bait fish, or how to identify bait fish, is it's a mass of smaller fish in a tight condensed area. So bait fish will normally swim together. They'll huddle in close for protection, and you'll see that on your sounder here. So in the screenshot I've got on my sonar, you can see in the middle up here, it almost looks like it's all just structure. It's just so dense because there's heaps of bait there. My down scan kind of reaffirms that as well. And then on the side scan, I can see around this wreck that there's a lot of these bait fish, and on both the left and right kind of under us, I can see that as well. So bait fish will generally show up in that kind of pattern. So it's a dense ball, it's a dense mass gathering of small fish. If they were bigger, you would see the individual returns more clearly. So you'd see a lot more wavy lines through that school. If they were slimy mackerel, for example, they don't show up necessarily as that tight clump or haze, depending on the depth of water you're in though. Generally, they'll have more of their own presence in that school of bait. Now, if I was I'm in 30 foot here, so let's say that's 10 meters. Let's say if I was in 100 meters of water, the way that bait's going to show up is different, because now that, even if it's a slimy mackerel, in the scheme of things is tiny in that depth range, so they will show up more as a haze in that deeper water. But in here, where I'm in 10 meters, if I was to find a school of slimy mackerel or yellowtail, they're going to show up more as individual fish, more pronounced and more obvious. So again, even considering the depth you're in will help you identify the fish. Now let's look at some fish that we actually want to catch. Now first up, I've got some snapper, a school of snapper in Moreton Bay. So again, same screen layout, got GPS, sonar, and downscan. There's not much happening on the sonar and downscan, there's not much under us. But on the left-hand side, you can see here, there is quite a lot happening. Now I've got a school of fish here. There's probably, I don't know if you counted them, maybe 50. There's probably more as I kept driving. And these fish are tight to the bottom. You can see that because the shadows are very close to the returns. There's not much distance between the shadows. And these fish also have a bit more, they're a bit more rounded, which is more obvious for snapper. So that's how I knew they were snapper, plus catching them helps as well. A couple of other things to note in the screenshot. You can see that we've got these sand undulations running left to right. That's this line here. What that actually is like the sandy bottom going up and down, and these fish are sitting in the cutaways of that undulation bottom. Now down here you can sort of see, I just want to explain this because this is important as well, that there's a couple of fish returns that are longer and not as rounded as the other ones. And the reason why is because I was traveling slower through that area, and therefore those fish spent more time in my sonar beam, and they would appear to be a lot bigger and longer than what they actually are. So if you're moving very slowly, if your drift is at a standstill, those fish can appear quite big if they are continually in your sonar beam. But if you're passing through at a decent pace, so anything from say 4 to 6 knots, then you'll get quite an accurate return of those fish, and you'll be able to gauge what size they are and what type of fish they are. So in this instance, the reason I knew what these fish were is that I'm in Moreton Bay. Snapper are a prime target. I was in a peak time of year for them, and by looking at the screenshot, I could tell that the profile of the returns of the fish made it even easier for me to make that decision that yes, these are snapper, and you're definitely casting. And again, if you saw that, it didn't matter where you were, what you were chasing, you're putting a lure in. But because you know what they are, you can then present the right bait, the right lure to that specific fish to increase your chance of actually catching. Now another screenshot here, this is again in Moreton Bay, and I'm fishing in an area I'm fishing in an area that is known for holding schools of golden trevally, or at least it used to be. And this is a screenshot of those golden trevally here. And I know that they're golden trevally because, one, that specific area, they school up, I've known that. Two, you can see from the screenshot that these bodies, the shadows that are returned on these fish are quite round. Another thing that's giving away is that the return on these fish is separate to the actual shadow. So those fish are sitting higher up in the water column. Trevally in general do tend to move, like pelagic fish, higher up in the water column, and that's giving that away there. So even though I'm on the side. So here's another screenshot. This one is again in Moreton Bay, and I'm in an area that is or was renowned for holding schools of golden trevally. And this is a screenshot of golden trevally. This is a piece of structure, firstly, I'll just point that out. But what we've got here are some fish returns, and then we've got these shadows here. Now, you can see quite clearly these shadows are different to the other ones we've seen before. They're quite round, but the fish returns themselves are quite small. So it's kind of indicating small return, but tall body, quite round. And now, the way I can identify that these fish are what they are is, one, understanding what I have caught or what people caught or what fish reside in that area. Two is starting to take cues of the screenshot and put together a bit of a understanding of what these fish could be. So a couple of things happening. So like I said, the returns are very small, the shadows are very round. Another thing to note is that the returns are quite separate from the shadows, meaning those fish are sitting higher up in the water column, and the shadow is projected back. So these fish are sitting high up. Trevally and other pelagic species tend to move further up in the water column, and this is consistent with that. So all these cues that you can take from your sounder will help you identify what the fish are before you even cast at them. And using a side scan in this instance, I don't need to drive directly on top of them to know that they're sitting up. I can see that just by understanding that screenshot. Okay, now let's take a look at a screenshot of Mulloway. Now this was taken in the Brisbane River. You can see I'm fishing alongside or nearby some of the wharves. And on the right hand side in particular, I've got a lot of Mulloway that are sitting tight to the bottom. And these are big fish, around a meter to, I think the biggest one we caught was a meter 3, and they're all around that size. Great size, great fun. Now, the trick with this location is I'm either going to encounter Mulloway or threadfin salmon. It's generally one of the two. But the way these fish are schooled up is not how threadfin salmon school up. So if I pull up to an area and see this, if I see schools of fish in these large numbers, most of the time it would indicate to me that that's Mulloway. It's very rare that you'll see threadfin salmon. While it does happen, not as commonly. Threadfin salmon are normally in smaller patches of like 2 or 3 fish or 5 fish, maybe sometimes up to 10. but not like this, where there'd be 50 to 100 fish in the same area, not moving around too much, and staying close to the bottom. And that is almost typical of Mulloway in southeast Queensland. So because I know that pattern, if I see fish sitting in that particular way, I'm very confident that those are Mulloway, and then I'll throw a lure that I know is consistent with catching good Mulloway. So that's how I identify that a school of fish is Mulloway, like this example. So a few other things to note from the screenshot. You can see the wharf, you can just catch the edge of it. There's a lot of fish here on the right hand side. There's a couple on the left hand side, not as many. So I'm definitely casting on the right. And you can see that there's a fair lack of shadow. It's very, very faint, very close to the fish, which means those fish are very tight to the bottom. So in this instance, you want to make sure your lure is hitting the bottom and staying as close as you can to those fish. Most of the time, schools of Mulloway, they're going to be very close to the bottom, in the daytime anyway. Alright, so the last screenshot here, we're looking at threadfin salmon. Now, I know I just said that they don't school up in big numbers typically, but here's an example where I've probably never seen more than this in one particular school anyway, but there's about 20 fish in roughly the same area. They did split up after this. The reason I knew that these were threadfin salmon straight away and they weren't a school of Mulloway was because of the depth that we were in. So I know that Mulloway do school up in big numbers, but not in that kind of depth of water. They're generally in 30 feet plus. If you've seen my other video on Mulloway, you know that generally I like to find them in deeper water. And these fish, in 4 meters of water, threadfin salmon have no issue being in shallow water. So I'm quite confident they're not Mulloway, they're going to be threadfin salmon. Even though, again, the returns here look very similar to the ones in the previous shot, which were Mulloway. Long grains of rice, bright returns. By knowing the context, by knowing the type of areas these fish like to live in, I can quickly gauge what kind of fish this is going to be. So you don't have to apply this to these particular fish. I guess the example and the point I'm trying to get across here is if you know the location you're in, what patterns those fish follow, you can quickly understand what those fish are. A couple other giveaways for me is that threadfin salmon will often sit higher up in the water column and they'll cast a shadow further away from them, which some of these are doing. Threadies typically like to move in pairs, and if you look at this patch on the bottom, that is a very typical screenshot of threadfin salmon. You'll see that very often where the two of them will be swimming side by side. And lastly, just back on the shadows, some fish will throw shadows that make it really obvious that to tell what they are. So for example, threadfin salmon barramundi, they do an excellent job of casting very clear shadows with their fins and their whole profile, so you can clearly see what they are. Jewfish, not as well. Snapper, not as well. They generally just give like an overall shadow. But for some reason, threadies, barra, sharks cast really clear shadows. And that is also a really easy way to tell what fish is what. And if you want to improve the types of shadows you're getting or the clarity in your shadows, what you need to be doing is changing your frequency to a higher frequency. So for me, I tend to go on a low frequency because that gives me greater side scan width. I like to cover more areas. I'm not too concerned on the clarity of a shadow. If I see fish there, I'm going to cast at them anyway. I'm not too concerned on the exact species, and I can use other cues to help me understand what they are. But if you really want those shadows, increase your frequency from 455 up to 800 or 1000 plus, whatever works best for your sounder. What we want to make sure we understand is that we know what kind of fish inhabit that area. What species are there? Is there brim, flathead, mangrove jack, giant trevally? Are they pelagic? Do they move high up in the water column? Do they sit on the bottom and sulk? What do those fish do? What time of year is it? Is it winter? Are they schooling up in a certain area? Is it summer where they spread out and they hunt on their own? Understanding these cues, how these fish operate on a day-to-day basis, will help you understand what you're seeing on your sounder and then give you more information so you can present the right lure to the right fish and hopefully come home with more fish. If you like this video, make sure you like and subscribe. We've got more videos coming out like this every week to cover all different facets of fishing. If you want to learn more about how to use your sounder, you can check out my sounder course that's just about to be released that goes through all the details to help you understand your sounder better. My name is Nabil, and this is my fishing coach.